Well, way back when I was growing up, I never really liked kids. I never wanted kids. I never fashioned myself as a mom or envisioned myself as being a parent. But when I married my husband, I found my soulmate in college. When we got together, he wanted a couple of kids, so I said, "Oh, nicest thing I'll ever do for anybody, right?" I decided to have a couple of kids for him, and on our second pregnancy, I ended up dropping two eggs in one split, and I ended up with natural triplets. So I went from being a mom of one to a mother of four overnight. But also, prior to the children, I had started my own business. I left the corporate world in New York City and went and started my own business. And I'm an entrepreneur, and my husband's in the military, so I moved around with him so that I could support his journey of flying fighter jets. And after about 6 years of marriage, thought, oh, he wants kids. I'll have a couple kids, and ended up going from one to four. So while I am also very entrepreneurial and I've run my own business, we got we get to the book title because I found myself in the deep end swimming without, a life raft when it
Yeah.
came to parenting while also running my businesses. So
Okay, so you had 4 children, you've had this journey with your husband, traveling the country. How did you end
uh
up being a parenting specialist, especially from someone who didn't want kids?
right. Well, those that have much to learn turn out to be the better teachers. In my opinion, I had, so much to figure out. And I'm a type A person in my own business, do it because I said, I had no clue of what parenting entailed. And I had no idea that you had to have all these multi ways of approaching kids and developing those relationships and what goes into that. It was hugely eye-opening for me. So, of course, overwhelmed with four kids and working and a husband that was deployed to war when they were very young, I was yelling all the time. So I realized that my kids' eyes were glazing over, nothing was working. And being type A, thinking just do it because I said,
Mm,
realizing quickly that that just doesn't work,
mm.
and just understanding all the nuances that it takes to teach and train and mold a young child. So I found myself in a parenting class. The kids were in a Montessori school for kindergarten. My older son was, and I was just exhausted, yelling all the time, frustrated that they weren't doing. He especially wasn't doing what I asked. So I found myself in a parenting class, and I got some basic foundations to just Montessori is all about independence and all about what kids are capable of doing on their own. And it kind of opened my eyes. So once I started doing a couple of the concepts, I have an innate ability for sales and for reading people and for psychology, and I'm a quick study. So I'm intuitive, and I started once they kind of sparked that in me and showed me what was capable. I was kind of off and running and using some of my own innate abilities. And as I started experimenting and learning and using more techniques with my kids, I realized I really had an ability to do this and to raise good kids who are accountable, who are independent. And as more friends started, experiencing my kids and seeing how they were behaving, they would ask me, what do I do with this? What do I do with that? And so it sort of happened organically. Kids were maybe our oldest was about 6 and our triplets were maybe 3 at the time. And around that age, I started kind of getting my sea legs, right? Like getting my feet underneath me going, okay, I think I've got this. I think I understand now. I have to dial it back. And so when I wrote the book, I was able to sort of share with everybody my journey of discovery as to how I learned the best way to motivate young children and to create accountability and just do all of those things that help create independent kids that can make decisions for themselves. So that's kind of how it happened organically for me to be able to see how what I was doing was working.
How quickly after you started implementing the techniques did you see a difference in your son's behavior?
very quickly. In fact, I grew up where my mom was a micromanager, and I grew up punished. Okay, I grew up in the 70s. Back in those days, all of us as parents, all we're doing is the best that we can. We don't
Hmm.
really know what to do until we're in the situation. And
Right.
if you can't read a room and you can't say, okay, I have to check in with myself. Parenting is about me. It's not about the kids because they're responding to me. Even though we think we're responding to their behavior, they're
Hmm.
actually responding to us. So you have to stop in the moment and put that mirror on yourself and say, what can I do differently? If I'm getting this result when I behave this way, how do I switch it up? How do I show up differently?
Mm.
And so that was really just, me taking stock of quickly. I'm a quick learner. Okay, this isn't working. When I started applying some of these techniques, it really did work quickly because I was listening and I was holding myself accountable that if I'm going to take credit for a good behaved, well behaved child, I need to also
Mhm.
take credit when they're not behaving.
Oh,
And,
yes.
you know, it really was that epiphany for me, which kind of gave me just like a vertical learning curve. Like, okay, wow, this is what. So when I treat my kids with respect and I treat them with expectations and I don't micromanage and I don't control. So because I was grounded and because my mom used punishment on me, and again, this is what she knew, is all she knew. Because of all of that, I was able to quickly kind of say, okay, this isn't working. My yelling, my punishment, my restriction isn't working. But because I took the class, I was able to kind of start learning a few techniques about what would work at those young ages. And then I grew along with that as the kids got older and started just ramping up the techniques and the methods until, through teenage years, it was really, I'm not going to say it was easy, but it was much easier because I'd already had kids that were making their own decisions and, not being punished, but they were being taught and trained.
So let's talk specifically about what does work then. So you went to that parenting class, you had a bit of a light bulb moment yourself, you started implementing. What was working? What stopped the yelling? Let's start there.
Okay, so if I'm going to take accountability for myself and how I behave and how I'm reacting, that's a take stock moment. So what I teach parents and what I ultimately discovered for myself was to, as a business person, I'm a very big picture person, very sales, very big picture. And I've the reason a lot of parents feel very overwhelmed is because they're reacting to the moments, they're reacting quickly. So for me to figure out how to make changes, I had to stop and take stock from the. Let me break out my day. Right, I'm with the kids. How many hours? When do I yell most? How where are the patterns? Let me recognize the patterns, and then how do I break the patterns? Because I'm in charge of
Mhm.
how I create the culture of the home and how everything unfolds when they're young, right? I'm setting that tone. I create that culture. So for me, it took what I now call parenting in advance. And I teach parents to do what I sort of just did innately, which was look at your day, find out what's causing the most overwhelm, what's causing the most frustration, and is it right before the kids go to school? When do you yell the most? Ask yourself the hard questions. Ask yourself what is causing the yelling. Am I pushing? Let's go. You know, how do I back everything up to where it's a level playing field at this point? And then how do I unfurl the day with the most success? So, are we getting up too late?
Mm.
Do the kids, what do they need a better method to get themselves up? How do I back everything up to plan for the day? And how do I understand myself and my behavior? When am I yelling most? Do I take any accountability or ownership, or is it the kids pushing my buttons? How do I control them not pushing my buttons? What else can I do? And then you set that stage, and then from that place, you create expectations for the kids. So understand your day, understand your part, and what you have the power to do anything different. And then then you get your kids on board.
Okay, so let's use that scenario, the homework scenario. Is there a consequence if the homework doesn't get done? And how do we reframe that as like a consequence rather than a punishment?
Okay, so I like to call it a collaborative accountability. So it's what we do is, and at any age this is possible. And this is one of the things that was a light bulb moment for me with the Montessori, was truly showing me what my kids are capable of at any age. And so once I saw that and experienced that through the classroom, I was off and running going, oh my God, wow. Like these kids, I have a scenario in the book where I went in for a parent teacher conference. I think the triplets were 4 and our oldest was 6 or something. And I walked in, I went in, oh, I'm so exhausted. I had to pack their lunch. I was so involved with all these ways that I was needed. And the teacher looked at me like, why were you packing their lunch? And I'm like, they're 5, they're 4. What, aren't I supposed to be packing their lunch? No. She reminded me about all what they were all capable of. So once I realized, wow, I can restructure and expect almost anything if I just um, package it right and I just train them and take time for training.
Mhm.
So what I did was, and this isn't your specific question, but it does take a little bit of background to kind of build up to my answers
Sure.
as to how I got to these answers. Is that um, taking time for training and understanding that they're a clean slate. They just need and me rely on me to teach them and train them everything. So we put all their food on their level, moved all their cups down, got their juices. They were in charge of what flavors of juice, but they picked their juice, not me yelling, "Wait, do you want the grape or the red today?" Wait, I was huffing and puffing and overwhelmed
Mhm.
when that wasn't really my responsibility to pack their lunch. I'm responsible for purchasing the food, telling them you have to make a sandwich, you have to have a fruit, you have to have, but everything is on their level, they're packing it. Now I'm taking more off my plate. Um, and they were feeling very accomplished and very happy that they would eat their lunch as opposed to the kids that would throw it out. Right.
Mhm.
So these are the types of things that when we talk about accountability or a consequence, what I really like to talk about first is how I bake in the um, just that accountability factor for them, that they're in charge and that they're making decisions and that they're choosing and that they're eventually, that was so successful we moved on to having them do their own laundry at 6. They had the little pop-up hamper and taught them and trained them how to do that. So when you create a culture and an environment in your home to where your kids are really contributing and adding value, um, the consequence of either not doing homework or and the homework thing is probably a bad example because I have a whole thing about how I don't really worry about grades. That's their responsibility. But anyway, um, just that the expectations that you establish and the training combined, it just consequences tend to be more a collaboration because now we're going to go, okay, how do we get this done?
Right.
How are we going to, let's restructure. So if I look at my day and I plan ahead and I'm thinking about parenting in advance, I look at the day, I take accountability for how it's unfolding and how are they feeling rushed and what can I do to stop that? How else can I creatively problem solve? Um, then we talk with them and say, I notice that you're not getting your homework done when we come home from school. Would you rather do it after dinner? When would you like to do? Because you're getting your homework done. We have responsibilities, we have papers we need to do. So I talk about it more as a collaborative
Mhm.
consequence as opposed to a punishing consequence or a demand, because
Mhm.
that doesn't motivate anybody.
Let's talk about blame and also the impact on children when we compare our kids to other people's kids.
Mhm. So blame is again. I'm huge about accountability, huge about taking ownership. Um, you know, I remember our older kid was in the backyard when I was working, and I saw him hit one of the younger ones, And of course, the younger one cried. And my older one, they came to the house and the younger one's crying. And I looked at my older son and he's like, I don't know why he's crying, you know. And I remember in that moment, he was, I don't know, 5 or 6, my older one. And I remember in that moment going, I will be damned if I'm going to have a kid who doesn't take ownership of his behavior. And I made it really kind of like my goal that at any time that I had a chance to circle back and go, what was your part? What did you do? I saw you. He won't just cry. Like building and baking in those that consciousness and just making sure that they don't blame others. I mean, ever, never. I wouldn't let them blame or make up an excuse, and I would never. I would always take ownership. So with parenting, I'm very big about leadership. We are leaders, and leadership is lacking in the world, and it has for a long time across the
Mm.
board. I
Mhm.
mean, from the smallest level to the highest level. You know, you think why is this about winning? And I, you know, modeling with my kids leadership at every level that
Mm.
well, okay, if I give a little, you give a little, we both win. So how do we creatively problem solve? Rather, I am not the dictator that's telling you how this has to be and what's going to be happening.
Mhm.
So anytime there was a situation where we could take accountability, and I'd say, hey, guess what? You know what? I stepped on your Lego toy and I broke it. I'm not saying, you know, I was tired because you got me up last night. I very careful
Right.
about my words, very careful about what I project onto the kids. So number one, about me, what am I modeling? And number two, when you hear your child be tempted to blame anything else, always say, and make it okay that they made that mistake or that they, so always removing that blame when they take accountability. Don't shame them, you know, don't embarrass them, celebrate that. Because if you allow blaming and you blame, that is just teaching them that they never have to be responsible for their words and actions. And we don't want anybody like that in society.
I also want to know about timeouts. I know parents, particularly, timeouts are pretty popular for younger children. Let's talk about that because what I'm hearing you say is basically there's a lot of work for the parent if they are the type of person that is doing the opposite of these behaviors because it takes a lot of, like you said, personal accountability and responsibility. And I think that a lot of people don't have that, you know?
Well, what listen, when people come to me, they need help.
Right.
Their life is out of, so they're willing to say, what do I do? Actually, when you do the parenting the way my methods are easier because now you're not so reactionary. Everything is under control because now you're laying out your day. Your kids understand what's expected of them, and you've got your carrot as to whatever it is they want, whether it's a car, whether it's a toy, whether it's time on TV or computer time. You've got your carrot built in to the accountability factor of what did we agree to, and now we don't have to yell and punish. So when we talk about timeout, it's the same thing is applicable for younger kids. I'll give you an example. I had a huge our dining room we turned into a big playpen for the triplets, and our older son always wanted to go in and play. So if the triplets were two, my older son was like 4 or 5, 3 years difference. He'd want to go in there and play, but every time he went in there, someone cried within minutes, seconds, because it was power trip for him. He could make somebody cry, and it was attention. And undoubtedly, I'd be in my office. I'd run in there. Why every time you go in there, somebody's crying? Blah, 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 blah. Finally, this is going on every day. Finally, okay, when he goes in there, he makes somebody cry. I finally dacked it up and parented it in advance. So this time I said, every time you go in there and you make somebody cry, if you choose to do that again, what should we do about that? And he comes up with a consequence for himself at
Okay.
5. Well, I have to get out. Okay. 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 So you have to get out. So inevitably somebody cries. I'm being tested now. Um, I go over there, and instead of yelling, I just say, what did we agree to? If somebody cried, I have to get out. Now, I said, okay, go take some time. And when you're ready, this is the key. When you're ready to play without somebody crying, you may rejoin them. Now, here's the subtle difference between the timeout and what I just did. Timeout is parent directed. It's controlled by me. You go to your room and you stay in your room until I tell you. Parent directed, no ability for the child to make decisions or to make choices or to take stock of his actions and himself. All right. So now I walk over and I say, what did we agree to? I have to get out. Okay. When you're ready to play without somebody crying. Now, I took him at his word. 10 seconds later, I'm ready to play. Most parents would be like, oh, you can't possibly be ready. We're going to attach controlling adult thoughts to that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I took him at his word and I trusted him. I said, okay, as long as you're willing to play with no one crying, then you can go in. I probably only had to do that whole scenario twice. And no one cried because I had buy-in from him. We talked about it up front. I parented in advance, and he was in charge of the consequence. He picked it himself. And I gave him the freedom to go in and if, when you're ready to play without. So in any case, you can structure this methodology in any way. And this is where parents will come to me and their specific issue, their specific problem. We can always find a way to structure it, but it's a lot easier. It's a little bit more cerebral, but when you understand it and you see how it works, oh my gosh, it's very freeing, very freeing.
All right, before we wrap up, let's talk a little bit more about your book. Where can people get it? Let's go into a little bit of detail about more specifically what it's about. I love the title, Parenting Without Giving a Fuck. Totally my style.
Well, it's after going through raising teenagers, going through every phase, especially the teenagers, you really have to dial it back. And of course we care. That's a counterintuitive message. Of course we care very much, but we have to give the impression that we don't, right? Because the kids just don't want us that involved. And if we've done all of our accountability training ahead of time, we can start to let go. So the book is available on Apple. It's available on Amazon. It's available in some stores, but yeah, Amazon and Barnes and Noble. It's available on a lot of different platforms. And I did get a Mom's Choice Award for it. So I'm pretty proud that I've gotten a couple of awards in the parenting nonfiction realm. So I'm super proud of that.
Thanks for listening to the Rebel Love Podcast, the podcast about love, sex, and relationships. If you like this episode, please support us by subscribing and leaving a review on your favorite podcast platform, and find all the details of this episode and more at rebellove.com/podcast.